I am Nathaniel. I am 32 years old, and for the first 29 years of my life, I was entirely invisible to the very people who were supposed to love and protect me the most. Exactly 3 weeks ago, my own flesh and blood tried to publicly humiliate me in front of 500 of the wealthiest, most powerful people in this city. While I was standing there in a bespoke tuxedo, minding my own business, my older brother looked at me with pure, unadulterated disgust and said, "Grab me a scotch, you glorified secretary." He laughed right in my face, a cruel, echoing sound that I had heard 1,000 times growing up. His wife, Vivian, chimed right in, aggressively throwing her cheap, heavy beaded purse directly at my chest. She told me to hold her things and fetch her a drink, treating me like a disposable coat check boy in front of the city's elite. But there is one massive, earth-shattering thing they did not know. I was not just a guest at that gala. I was the senior director of acquisitions at Apex Holdings. I was the man holding absolute, unyielding legal power over their entire financial future, their massively bloated salary, their underwater mortgage, and their so-called prestigious legacy. And right now, as I sit here telling you this story, they are facing total bankruptcy, begging me to save them from a massive corporate lawsuit that is about to tear their entire lives apart. Before I tell you exactly what happened in that ballroom, and how I brought a fraudulent corporate empire to its absolute knees with a single sentence, hit that like button if you believe that absolute justice always comes for those who deserve it. And do not forget to let me know in the comments exactly where you are watching from tonight. Now, let us go back to where this massive storm actually began. There is a very specific, terrifying kind of silence that falls over a crowded room when power suddenly and violently shifts. Listen to me carefully. If you have ever been in a room where someone's entire world collapses in real time, you know exactly what I am talking about. It is not a peaceful silence. It is not calming. It is heavy, thick, and suffocating. It is the sound of absolute terror realizing it has just cornered the wrong person. I was standing in the dead center of the Metropolitan Grand Hall. The crystal chandeliers hanging above us cost more than my brother's entire real estate portfolio. The air in that room smelled of expensive designer perfume, roasted duck from the catering kitchen, and pure, unfiltered desperation. My brother Garrison and his wife Vivian were staring at me, their faces completely drained of all color, looking as if they had just seen a ghost. The glass I had just purposefully shattered on a waiter's tray was still chiming softly against the polished marble floor, the sharp sound echoing through the dead quiet room. Hundreds of eyes were locked directly on us. The CEO of their company, a man who had just demanded I fetch him a drink like a common servant, was literally shaking in his expensive leather shoes. They had spent my entire life stepping on my back to make themselves feel taller. But tonight, the stepping stone they had relied on for decades had suddenly turned into a live landmine. You see, growing up, every single family has a dynamic. In my family, Garrison was the undeniable golden child. He was older, louder, much more demanding, and frankly, a master manipulator from the time he could walk. My parents, Margaret and Harold, operated under the bizarre delusion that Garrison was a misunderstood genius destined to change the world. I was just the spare part. I was the designated helper. I was the one who organized the dusty garage, fixed the terrible Wi-Fi router, mowed the lawn, and stayed entirely out of the way. Let me give you a perfect example of how deep this betrayal ran. When it came time for higher education, my parents made a decision that set the tone for the rest of our lives. They completely drained the joint college fund they had saved for both of us just to send Garrison to an obscenely expensive out-of-state private university, simply because he complained that he did not want to live at home. I remember sitting at the kitchen table, looking at the bank statements, realizing my future had been stolen to fund his frat parties. My father did not even apologize. He just looked at me and said, "Your brother needs the networking opportunities, Nathaniel. You are smart, you will figure it out." They handed him my future on a silver platter. I did not scream. I did not throw a fit. I just walked out of the house, took out massive, suffocating student loans, worked exhausting night shifts at a shipping warehouse, and went to a local state college. I drove a beat-up sedan while Garrison came home for the holidays in a brand new sports car my father leased for him. At Thanksgiving dinners, Garrison sat at the head of the table next to my father, carving the turkey and talking loudly about his elite friends. I sat at the very edge of the table, near the kitchen swinging door, so I could easily get up and fetch the extra gravy or refill the water glasses. I was heavily conditioned to serve. I was conditioned to accept that my needs would always come second to his wants. The resentment from my family only grew darker and more pronounced as I started to build a real, independent life for myself. It is a strange psychological phenomenon, but sometimes, the more you succeed without someone's help, the more they absolutely hate you for it. They needed me to be the struggling younger brother. They needed me to be the guy they could look down on to feel better about their own mediocre choices. If I was successful, then Garrison was not the uniquely special one. And that was a reality my parents simply refused to accept. So, when Garrison leveraged his expensive degree to land a job as the director of marketing at a flashy tech startup called Vantech Solutions, my parents threw a backyard party that rivaled a royal coronation. My mother bragged to absolutely anyone who would listen at her monthly HOA meetings. She acted like he had just cured a major global illness. Meanwhile, I was quietly, ruthlessly climbing the ranks in the brutal world of corporate finance, navigating billion-dollar mergers, building massive stock portfolios, and securing my own financial fortress. But to them, I was just a guy pushing papers in a cubicle. I let them believe it. I let them think I was struggling to pay my rent. I let them treat me like a glorified secretary because the hard truth is, I stopped caring about their toxic approval a long time ago. Or at least I thought I did. To truly understand this terrifying silence in the ballroom, and why I did not feel a single ounce of guilt as I watched my brother's career burn to the ground, we have to go back exactly 3 weeks. We have to go back to a quiet office, a red ink pen, and a corporate file that proved my family was built on a foundation of absolute lies. I thought I was just going to read a standard business proposal. I had no idea I was about to uncover a massive fraud that would force me to choose between my bloodline and my professional integrity. And let me tell you, when forced to choose between the people who broke you and the empire you built to fix yourself, the choice is not hard at all. It was 8 in the evening on a brutally cold Tuesday. I was sitting at my desk in my corner office on the 42nd floor of the Apex Holdings building. Outside my massive floor-to-ceiling windows, the city was a sprawling, endless grid of amber and white lights, beautiful, chaotic, and entirely indifferent to the millions of people living inside it. Inside my office, the only illumination came from my heavy brass desk lamp and the cold, sharp glow of 3 high-definition computer monitors. This office is my absolute sanctuary. The higher you climb in the world of corporate finance, the quieter the hallways get. It is the only place in the world where things make perfect, logical sense to me. Numbers do not lie. Numbers do not play favorites. Numbers do not care who the golden child is, or whose college fund was stolen, or who gets to carve the turkey at Thanksgiving. On the massive mahogany desk in front of me sat an incredibly thick, spiral-bound document. The cover was glossy, printed with a futuristic navy blue and silver logo. It read, Vantech Solutions, Series B Funding Proposal. I held a red pen in my right hand. I heavily prefer using physical ink on physical paper when I do a deep financial audit. It makes the numbers feel permanent. You cannot just delete red ink with a quick keystroke. I flipped the heavy pages to section 14, the part labeled User Acquisition and Market Penetration Strategy. I stared at a colorful graph where the projected user growth shot up vertically. It was a climb that defied every basic law of economics, physics, and reality. It was the kind of graph a child draws when you ask them how fast a rocket ship goes. Next to the graph, I pressed my pen down and wrote a single word in sharp cursive. Artificial. My brother, Garrison, was the director of marketing who had proudly signed his name on these exact numbers. As I looked at the blatantly fraudulent data, an old, bitter memory forced its way into the front of my mind, reminding me exactly who I was dealing with. It happened exactly 5 years ago at a ridiculously overpriced Italian restaurant uptown. I had just been promoted to vice president of strategic operations at my previous firm. It was a massive, unprecedented leap for a 27-year-old in my industry. I was making a base salary that easily eclipsed my parents' combined income, and my 401k was finally looking like a real, impenetrable safety net. I invited the entire family out and offered to pay for everyone to celebrate. I wanted them to be proud of me. Just one time. I wanted my father to look at me the way he looked at Garrison. I remember holding up my glass of expensive red wine over the calamari appetizers. I smiled and told them the big news. I told them I got the VP promotion and a massive corner office. My mother did not even look away from the cocktail menu. She just gave a dismissive little nod, adjusted her reading glasses, and said, "That is nice, Nathaniel. Very stable work. Just make sure you do not get burned out doing all that paperwork for your bosses." Then the heavy front doors of the restaurant swung open. Garrison and Vivian burst in, 20 minutes late, laughing loudly. Garrison practically sprinted to the table, aggressively rolling up the sleeve of his tailored dress shirt to shove his wrist in everyone's face. He had just bought a brand new Rolex. For the next 2 excruciating hours, the entire conversation revolved around that single watch. The weight of the bezel, the exclusivity of the waiting list, the sheer prestige of having it on his wrist. My promotion died right there in the breadbasket, buried under a pile of empty praise for my brother's jewelry. Nobody asked what my new title meant. Nobody asked about my new office or my massive new responsibilities. My father even chuckled, took a sip of his scotch, and joked that maybe one day I could save up enough from my little admin job to get a nice watch like my brother. When the astronomical bill finally came, Garrison picked up the leather folder, glanced at the total, and slid it directly across the table to me. He smirked, patted my shoulder condescendingly, and said, "You got this, right, Nathaniel? Since you got that little raise or whatever." A little raise. I paid the $500 check in complete silence. I left a massive tip for the waiter, walked out into the freezing night, and walked to the subway station in the pouring rain, while my family piled into a luxury Uber Black. That was the exact night I realized I would never win. I would never be enough for them. And more importantly, that was the night I realized I no longer cared to try. I pulled my intense focus back to the present moment and stared at the Vantech proposal on my desk. "You are still here?" I did not have to look up to know it was Fiona. She was a senior associate, 1 level below me, and she possessed a highly toxic blend of ruthless ambition and zero corporate ethics. She wanted my corner office desperately. She wanted the prime real estate, the prestigious title, the power, and the massive bonuses that came with my job. She stood in my doorway, leaning against the glass frame, holding an overpriced green juice that probably cost $20. I kept my eyes glued to the paperwork. I told her someone had to stay late and check the math on the due diligence reports because clearly, no one at Vantech knew how to use a calculator. Fiona walked into my office entirely uninvited. She pointed a perfectly manicured finger at the Vantech file and smiled. It was a very cold, calculated smile. She told me she knew my brother was the marketing director over at Vantech. She suggested I hand the entire file over to her immediately to avoid any appearance of a conflict of interest. She wanted to poach this deal from me. A $5 million acquisition would guarantee her a fast-track promotion and a massive year-end bonus check. I set my red pen down on the desk. I looked at her and told her my disclosure forms were already signed, stamped, and cleared by the legal department weeks ago. I also told her she did not want this file. I called it financially radioactive. Fiona stepped closer, her tone dripping with fake, sugary concern. She accused me of protecting my family. She said she heard Vantech was desperate for cash, and if we killed this deal, my brother would be out on the street looking for a job. She crossed her arms, tilted her head, and dared to ask if I could really pull the trigger on my own blood. I leaned back in my heavy leather chair. I looked her dead in the eye and told her I do not pull triggers based on blood. I pull them based on hard data. I turned one of my massive monitors toward her. I pulled up a highly complex spreadsheet analyzing Vantech's raw server traffic over the last 6 months. I pointed to a massive, unnatural spike in user activity happening at exactly 3 in the morning, every single day without fail. I explained that 90% of their supposed new users logged in from a single warehouse server farm located in Eastern Europe. They stayed on the site for exactly 4 seconds, clicked an ad, and vanished completely. I looked at Fiona as her smug, arrogant smile completely dissolved into confusion and then sheer terror. I told her these were not people. They were automated bots. They were not just padding their numbers to look good for investors. They were inventing them out of thin air. It was not aggressive marketing. It was federal corporate fraud. If Apex Holdings bought this company, we would be buying an expensive ghost town, and everyone involved in the acquisition would be facing a massive lawsuit and potential jail time. Fiona stared at the screen, completely speechless. The corporate huntress had just realized the prey she wanted to steal was actually highly toxic poison. I turned the monitor back around to face me. I knew I had a storm brewing, but I thought the worst part of my week was simply going to be rejecting a bad business deal and dealing with an angry phone call from my brother. I thought I would just stamp denied on a piece of paper and move on with my life. I was so incredibly wrong. The real nightmare had not even started yet. Does Harrison know about this? Fiona whispered. Her blind ambition was totally neutralized by the terrifying legal implications staring her right in the face. She took a step back from my desk like the file was going to physically bite her. He is about to. A deep, commanding voice boomed from the hallway. Harrison, the executive vice president of Apex Holdings, walked into my office. He was a man in his late 50s who commanded absolute respect simply by existing in a room. He loosened his expensive silk tie, closed the heavy glass door behind him, and looked utterly exhausted. He was one of the very few people in this cutthroat corporate jungle I genuinely trusted and respected. I immediately briefed Harrison on the bot traffic. I showed him the smoking gun on the monitors. The user base was inflated by at least 40%. Harrison rubbed his temples and let out a heavy, tired sigh. He told me Dominic, the CEO of Vantech, had been calling his private office line every single hour, sounding completely frantic and unhinged. Harrison looked at Fiona and dismissed her with a sharp nod. She did not argue. She practically ran out of the room, absolutely thrilled to be completely disconnected from the impending explosion. Once the door clicked shut, Harrison sat down in the leather guest chair across from me. He looked dead serious. He told me the situation was much worse than fake users and bad marketing campaigns. Our internal risk management team had dug much deeper into Vantech's hidden financials. Dominic had not just burned through his legitimate investor cash. He had taken out massive, emergency bridge loans from unregulated private entities. I felt a cold knot form in the pit of my stomach. I looked at Harrison and asked him if he meant loan sharks. Harrison nodded slowly. He called them aggressive private capital. If this acquisition deal with Apex did not close, Dominic was not just going to face a standard corporate bankruptcy or a civil lawsuit. He was going to face people who collect debts with broken bones, property damage, and absolute ruin. Desperation makes people incredibly dangerous. Dominic needed a firm yes at the charity gala tonight, and he might try to force our hand publicly to save his own life. This completely changed the calculus. Garrison was not just begging for a promotion so he could buy another watch. He was unknowingly standing right next to a desperate, cornered man who was fighting for his physical safety. I asked Harrison if my brother knew about the illegal loans. Harrison seriously doubted it. Dominic kept his executives completely in the dark, using them as human shields to protect his own liabilities. But Garrison was loyal to a fault. He would do whatever his boss demanded. Harrison warned me that the gala was going to be extremely ugly. Dominic and my brother were going to corner me. They assumed this deal was a guaranteed success strictly because of our family connection. Harrison offered to assign a different director to deliver the final rejection, giving me an easy, clean way out. I looked down at the file. I thought about the years of snide comments. I thought about my parents treating my entire career like a cute little hobby while treating Garrison like royalty. I stared at the glowing screen. Read those words again. Not, I hope my brother can make it. Not, I cannot wait to celebrate together. Just a utility. a walking coat rack, a glorified assistant they could order around at a black tie event. A direct text from Garrison popped up a second later. Garrison, hey man, Vivian is freaking out about her dress. Since you are coming to the gala anyway, can you stop by that artisan coffee shop on 5th? She needs an oat milk latte to calm her nerves. Extra hot. Do not be late. Thanks, kiddo. Kiddo. I am a grown man who manages a corporate real estate and tech portfolio worth $300 million. But to Garrison, to Vivian, and to my parents, I was still the teenager they could order to run to the store for errands. They did not just think I was an assistant. They needed me to be their servant. It was the only way they could maintain their fragile illusion of superiority. They needed to force me to walk into a high-level corporate event holding a paper coffee cup like an intern. I did not reply. I turned the phone completely off and tossed it onto the leather seat. The car pulled up to my building in Tribeca. I live in a massive converted warehouse penthouse. It boasts 20-foot ceilings, exposed brick walls, and original timber beams. It is the kind of luxury real estate that gets featured in magazines. My family thinks I rent a tiny, damp studio apartment in a bad neighborhood because I never invite them over. I never corrected them. Why give them something else to be jealous of? I walked inside, threw my keys on the massive granite kitchen island, and poured myself a glass of neat bourbon. I walked into my master bedroom and looked at the heavy garment bag hanging on the closet door. Tonight was not just a charity gala. It was a market correction. My family's valuation of me was trading way below actual value, and tonight I was going to release the definitive earnings report. I unzipped the bag. Getting ready for war requires armor. For me, that armor was a bespoke, midnight blue tuxedo tailored in Milan. It did not have a single visible designer logo. My brother wore clothes that screamed their price tag. He thought wealth was about shouting. I knew true wealth was about whispering. I slipped into the suit. Fit flawlessly. I strapped on a vintage Patek Philippe watch I bought after closing a massive merger last year. I looked in the full-length mirror. The quiet, obedient helper was dead. Staring back at me was an apex predator. I grabbed my keys. It was time to show them exactly what a glorified secretary does for a living. I was ready to walk into the storm. The Metropolitan Grand Hall is an incredibly cavernous space, heavily gilded in gold leaf and steeped in old, untouchable money. Tonight, it was filled with 500 of the city's most influential figures, politicians, tech founders, and unfortunately, my family. I arrived in my private town car at exactly 8:15. The winter wind coming off the river was absolutely brutal, cutting right through you. The line for general admission and the standard coat check snaked out the front doors and halfway down the freezing city block. I saw junior executives shivering in their cheap, rented tuxedos, frantically checking their watches, desperate to get inside before the open bar closed. I did not join them. I walked straight past the shivering crowd toward the VIP entrance on the east side of the building. The entrance was blocked by a thick red velvet rope and a massive security guard wearing a discreet earpiece and holding a digital tablet. He looked completely bored, turning away people who tried to talk or bribe their way in. I walked up to the rope. He did not even look up at me. He just asked for a name in a flat, exhausted tone. Nathaniel, I said calmly. Apex Holdings. The guard swiped his screen, stopped, and his head snapped up so fast I thought he pulled a muscle. The boredom vanished from his face instantly, replaced by sharp, alert professional respect. He unclipped the heavy velvet rope with a loud snap and stepped aside quickly. He apologized profusely for the wait and told me Mr. Reginald was already inside and asking for me. Reginald was the CEO of a global hedge fund that moved international markets with a single press release. The fact that he was asking for me meant the rumors of the Vantech audit had already started bleeding into the high-level financial circles. There are no secrets in this city, only delayed reactions. I stepped inside. The freezing wind was instantly replaced by the overwhelming warmth of the hall and the low, expensive hum of cocktail chatter. Waiters in crisp white jackets glided through the crowd like ghosts, balancing heavy silver trays of vintage champagne and caviar. I took a glass of sparkling water from a passing tray and walked toward the massive ice sculpture in the center of the VIP lounge. Reginald spotted me immediately. He was a man in his 70s, sharp as a tack, wearing a classic black tuxedo that probably cost more than a luxury car. He walked over and shook my hand firmly. His voice was a gravelly whisper. He joked that he was surprised I came out of my corporate cave to mingle with the commoners. Then he leaned in closer, his sharp eyes scanning the room. He told me he saw the Vantech executive team come in through the general admission line. He noted that they looked incredibly desperate, sweating through their collars, frantically looking for a lifeline. Reginald knew I was the lead director on their file. He casually asked if he should short their stock first thing Monday morning to make a quick killing before the blood hit the water. I took a sip of my water. I looked at Reginald and told him I could not possibly provide insider information. He just chuckled, patted my shoulder heavily, and told me to enjoy the show. He already knew the answer. In our world, silence is often the loudest confirmation. I turned and looked out through the massive glass partition separating the elevated VIP lounge from the main ballroom floor. Across the massive room, near the kitchen service doors, the absolute worst, loudest spot in the venue, stood a small, chaotic cluster of people. It was Dominic, looking red-faced, agitated, and terrified. Next to him was Garrison, constantly checking his phone and looking around the room frantically, likely looking for me with his coffee. Vivian was standing beside them in a silver sequin dress that caught the light in an aggressive, tacky way. It looked like a dress someone would wear if they were trying entirely too hard to prove they belonged. They looked like tourists who had lost their map in a dangerous neighborhood. I felt a strange, profound sense of calm wash over me. For years, I had allowed these people to dictate my worth. I had let their mockery make me feel small. I had worried about their custody over my self-esteem. But looking at them now, from the elevated floor of the VIP section, surrounded by actual billionaires, they did not look intimidating. They looked remarkably small. They looked pathetic. I took a deep breath, handed my empty glass to a waiter, and stepped off the plush carpet of the lounge onto the main floor. I began the long, deliberate walk across the ballroom toward them. I made it halfway across the floor before Vivian spotted me. She tapped Garrison aggressively on the shoulder. Garrison's head snapped in my direction. I saw his eyes widen, first in shock that I was actually there, then quickly settling into his familiar, comfortable, arrogant disdain. He marched toward me, Vivian trailing right behind him like a shadow. He stopped 2 feet away, completely invading my personal space. He looked me up and down, his eyes raking over my midnight blue tuxedo. He actually sneered. "You actually showed up," Garrison said. It was not a greeting. It was an accusation. He looked at my suit and shook his head in absolute disgust. "And what the hell are you wearing? You look like an undertaker. I told you to wear something sharp. This is a high-level networking event, Nathaniel, not a funeral. You stick out like a sore thumb." I kept my voice perfectly level, revealing absolutely nothing. "Hello, Garrison. Hello, Vivian." Vivian crossed her arms, her cheap bracelets clinking together. "Did you even get the coffee I asked for? We have been standing here for 20 minutes. My feet are already killing me and I have a headache." I looked her in the eye and told them I had been busy working. Garrison scoffed loudly, rolling his eyes. He turned to a young woman standing slightly behind them holding a stack of glossy brochures. It was Clara, his junior marketing assistant. She looked terrified to just be breathing the air in this room. "Clara, this is my little brother, Nathaniel," Garrison announced, gesturing to me like I was a piece of defective, embarrassing machinery. "He works over at the Apex building too, but he is in admin support staff. Filing papers, booking conference rooms, keeping the printer toner stocked. Basic clerical stuff." Clara gave a weak, awkward wave. She looked incredibly uncomfortable. I just nodded at her politely. I did not correct him. I let him dig his grave deeper. Garrison stepped closer and aggressively adjusted the lapel of my jacket. A patronizing, physical move designed to make me feel like a helpless child. He told me to go find their assigned table. Table 42. He ordered me to make sure the chairs were pulled out and to fold the napkins properly because he did not trust the catering staff to do it right. He pointed toward the back of the room, near the swinging kitchen doors where the waiters were rushing in and out. "And stay back there," he commanded, pointing a finger directly in my face. "Do not wander around the front tables. Security is extremely tight tonight, and I do not want to have to call a lawyer to bail you out when they realize you do not belong here. Dominic is on edge, and we are closing a $5 million deal. Do not embarrass me." He turned his back on me, completely dismissing my existence, and walked away to grab another drink. I stood there in the absolute center of the room, watching my own brother walk away, entirely unaware that he had just handed the executioner the axe. I did not go to table 42. I reached into my jacket pocket and felt the heavy, embossed cardstock of my corporate business cards. I looked toward the front of the room, where the head table sat empty, waiting for the real power brokers to take their seats. The storm had finally arrived, and I was exactly where I belonged, right in the eye of it. I walked away from my brother, leaving him standing near the general admission coat check. I could feel the heavy, embossed cardstock of my corporate business cards resting securely in the inner pocket of my midnight blue tuxedo jacket. I did not head toward the back of the room near the swinging kitchen doors where table 42 was located. That was the overflow seating. That was where you put the people who did not matter to the bottom line. Instead, I adjusted my cuffs, took a deep breath of the air-conditioned ballroom, and walked directly toward the absolute front of the Metropolitan Grand Hall. I walked toward the raised, velvet-carpeted platform where Table 1 was situated. Table 1 was the head table. It was an entirely different world up there. It was set with heavy crystal glasses, gold-rimmed china plates, and massive floral arrangements of white lilies that strategically blocked the view of the lesser tables. This was the specific table reserved for the true power brokers of the evening. The mayor was sitting there, laughing loudly at a joke I could not hear. Several key city council members were present, cutting into their steaks. And sitting right in the center, reviewing a dense spreadsheet on his secure company phone, was Harrison, the executive vice president of Apex Holdings. I casually climbed the 2 short stairs onto the VIP platform. I pulled out the heavy, gold-backed chair directly to Harrison's right and sat down. I picked up the thick linen napkin and draped it across my lap. I was perfectly calm. My heart rate was slow and steady. Harrison looked up from his phone. A faint, highly knowing smile played on his lips. He picked up a crystal pitcher, poured a glass of sparkling water, and slid it directly across the white tablecloth toward me. He leaned in slightly, keeping his voice beneath the ambient jazz music playing in the background. He asked me how my family reconnaissance mission was going down in the trenches. I took a slow sip of the cold water. I looked at Harrison and told him it was highly hostile. I explained that my brother had just relegated me to table 42, right next to the industrial dishwashers, and explicitly ordered me not to embarrass his brand new Rolex in front of the important people. Harrison chuckled darkly. He took a sip of his own drink. He noted that it was quite charming of my family to be so consistently terrible. Then, his sharp eyes shifted to something moving rapidly over my left shoulder. His relaxed expression hardened instantly into the cold, calculated mask of a seasoned corporate executive. He tapped his finger on the table and told me to brace myself. He said Dominic was currently heading our way, and the man looked incredibly unstable. I did not turn around immediately. I took my absolute time. I let the tension build in the room. In corporate negotiations, the person who moves first is usually the person who loses the leverage. When I finally glanced over my shoulder, I saw Dominic weaving aggressively through the dense maze of circular tables. He was holding a fresh drink, gripping the thick glass so tightly his knuckles were completely white. He looked absolutely furious. He was sweating heavily through his expensive collar. He was actually shouting at a young catering waiter who had accidentally bumped his shoulder with a bread basket. Trailing right behind Dominic, trying desperately to calm him down and manage his erratic behavior, were Garrison and Vivian. My brother looked like a man walking to the gallows. He was whispering frantically into Dominic's ear, trying to steer him back to their assigned table in the shadows. But they had originally been heading for the back of the room. Dominic had spotted Harrison sitting at the head table. Like a desperate moth drawn to a blinding flame, Dominic completely changed his intended course. He abandoned his route and began marching straight toward the VIP platform. He wanted to kiss up to the man who held the keys to his massive corporate salary, his upcoming Series B funding, and his very survival against the unregulated private capital lenders breathing down his neck. Garrison saw exactly where Dominic was going. He saw Dominic approaching the raised platform where the mayor was sitting. And then, through the crowd, Garrison saw me. He saw me sitting there, casually drinking sparkling water next to the executive vice president of the firm he was trying to extract $5 million from. I watched my brother's face completely slacken, his jaw practically unhinged, the color completely drained from his cheeks. He grabbed Vivian's arm so hard she stumbled forward, nearly pulling her over in her high heels. He let out a loud gasp and hurried to catch up with Dominic, reaching the edge of the platform at the exact same moment his CEO did. "Dominic, wait!" Garrison hissed, desperation leaking from every single pore of his body. He did not want Dominic to cause a scene in front of Apex Holdings. Then Garrison turned his bulging eyes directly to me. He leaned over the gold-rimmed plates on the table, his face turning a dangerous, mottled shade of red. He completely ignored the mayor and the city council members sitting just feet away. "Nathaniel!" Garrison whispered furiously, his voice trembling with sheer panic and years of conditioned arrogance. "What the hell are you doing up here? Get up. You are going to get arrested. You cannot sit here. This is for the executives." Dominic stopped in his tracks. He looked at Harrison, trying to put on a fake, charming, business-friendly smile. But then he looked down at me sitting in the chair. Because Dominic had never bothered to look at the official Apex Holdings corporate directory, and because he kept his own executives completely in the dark regarding who they were actually negotiating with, he did not recognize me as the lead director on his entire financial file. He only recognized me as the lowly administrative assistant that Garrison had pointed out in the lobby 20 minutes ago. Dominic's fake smile vanished instantly. He swayed slightly on his feet. The heavy smell of expensive scotch radiated off his suit. "Is this the younger brother?" Dominic slurred slightly, his bloodshot eyes narrowing in absolute disgust. "The glorified secretary you told me about? What is he doing at this table?" "Yes, sir. I am so incredibly sorry." "Dominic?" Garrison stammered, actually bowing his head in submission to a man who was running a massive financial fraud. He is confused. He thinks he can just sit anywhere because he works in the same office building. "Nathaniel, move. Right now. Before security comes and drags you out of here in handcuffs." I did not move a single muscle. I leaned back in my chair, resting my hands flat on the white tablecloth. I looked Garrison dead in the eye and told him I liked this seat very much. "You like this seat?" Dominic laughed. It was a wet, ugly, condescending sound that made several people at the neighboring tables turn their heads. "Do you have any idea how much a ticket for this specific table costs? Kid, it is $5,000 a plate. Do you even make $5,000 in an entire month on your little clerical salary?" Vivian jumped in, her cheap bracelets clanking together loudly. She glared at me with absolute venom. "Nathaniel, please, just stop being so embarrassing for once in your life. Let us just go back to our table before you ruin this whole night for us. You are ruining Garrison's big networking moment." "No!" Dominic suddenly slammed his heavy hand down on the table, violently rattling the expensive silverware and drawing the immediate attention of the mayor sitting 2 seats away. "I am sick of incompetence. I am sick of people not knowing their absolute place. First, the bank calls me about my loans. Now the help is sitting at the head table trying to play dress-up in a rented suit." He turned his furious, bloodshot eyes directly onto me. He leaned in so close I could smell the alcohol and the bitter, sharp scent of fear on his breath. He was a man who knew he was drowning, and he wanted to drag someone else under the water with him just to feel powerful for one last second. "You want to sit here? Fine. but be useful. My glass is empty. Dominic thrust his heavy crystal tumbler directly at my face, nearly hitting my nose. He commanded me to get him a refill, a double scotch, right now. He spoke to me like I was a dog. Garrison jumped in, utterly desperate to appease the man who paid for his luxury cars and his oversized mortgage. He looked at me with pleading, furious eyes. He snapped at me to just do it. He ordered me to stop embarrassing the family name. Get up, get the drink, and go hide at my assigned seat by the kitchen. And then Vivian delivered the final insult. She shoved her own empty wine glass toward me, followed immediately by her heavy, tacky beaded clutch purse. She literally dropped the purse onto the table right in front of my plate, knocking over my water glass and spilling ice onto the linen. "And hold this," Vivian demanded, rubbing her shoulder and sighing dramatically. "My shoulder is killing me from standing around waiting for you earlier. Be a dear, Nathaniel. Go to the bar. We will save your seat at the back." The sheer disrespect was total. It was absolute. They were treating me like a disposable servant in front of the executive vice president of the massive corporation they desperately needed to save them from total ruin. They were digging their own graves with a backhoe, and they had absolutely no idea. Harrison shifted in his seat next to me. I could feel the heat radiating off him. He looked ready to speak, ready to absolutely annihilate them on the spot and throw them out of the building. I put a hand on his arm beneath the table to stop him. "Not yet," my eyes told him. "Let them dig just a little bit deeper." I wanted to see exactly how far they would go. I looked down at the empty glasses. I looked at the cheap, heavy beaded purse sitting on the pristine white tablecloth. I looked up at Dominic, who was breathing heavily, then at my brother, who was sweating through his shirt. I asked them very softly if they wanted me to get their drinks. "Yes," Dominic shouted, his face turning purple. "Are you deaf? Move." I placed my hands on the table and stood up. I smoothed the lapels of my bespoke tuxedo. Garrison let out a heavy, audible sigh of relief. He actually thought he had won. He thought I was obeying his command just like I did when we were kids. He muttered to Vivian about how slow and stupid I was. I picked up the heavy purse. I picked up the empty glasses. I held them in my hands for a long, agonizing second. I thought about the stolen college fund. I thought about the ruined dinners. I thought about the massive family inheritance that my parents constantly threatened to take away from me to keep me in line. I thought about the years of being treated like a ghost in my own family. And then the steel trap finally snapped shut. I turned to the young catering waiter standing directly behind me. His name tag said Oscar. He was holding a large silver tray filled to the brim with fresh, expensive red wine intended for the mayor's table. He looked absolutely terrified of Dominic's yelling. He was shrinking back, trying not to be noticed. I looked at Oscar. I held the empty crystal glasses directly over his silver tray. I dropped them. They landed with a loud, aggressive clank against the metal, wobbling but not breaking. Then, I held Vivian's heavy, tacky beaded purse directly over the tray of full wine glasses. "Nathaniel?" Garrison asked, his voice suddenly trembling with a new, completely unfamiliar fear. He sensed the shift in the atmosphere. "What are you doing with her bag?" I looked Garrison right in his arrogant eyes. I let go of the purse. It dropped like a stone. It slammed violently into the delicate crystal wine glasses, shattering 3 of them instantly on impact. The deep red wine exploded everywhere like a bomb going off. It splashed across the polished marble floor, ruined the white tablecloth, and splattered directly onto Vivian's silver sequin dress in massive, dark red stains. "Oops," I said. My voice was completely devoid of emotion. It was ice cold. The sound of shattering glass cut through the enormous ballroom like a gunshot. The cocktail chatter at the nearby tables stopped instantly. The live jazz band on the stage abruptly stopped playing their instruments mid-note. 500 pairs of eyes, including the mayor, city councilman, and Reginald the billionaire hedge fund manager, turned to look directly at us. The silence that followed was absolute. It was deafening. "My bag!" Vivian shrieked at the top of her lungs, completely losing any sense of decorum. She dove for the wine-soaked clutch, completely ignoring the massive red stains ruining her dress. "You crazy freak! That is vintage! You ruined it!" Dominic stepped forward, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. He pointed a shaking, furious finger at my chest and screamed for security at the top of his lungs. He demanded that I be removed immediately, claiming to the room that I was drunk, disorderly, and dangerous. Garrison looked around, his face completely pale, realizing that every single important person in the entire city was watching him make a massive scene at the head table. The panic in his eyes was palpable. "Nathaniel, why? Why are you doing this?" Garrison pleaded, his voice cracking. "Why is everyone looking at you? You are ruining my career." "Because," Harrison said. Harrison stood up slowly from his gold-backed chair. He buttoned his suit jacket. His voice was not loud, but it possessed a deep, resonant, undeniable authority that commanded the entire room without any effort. "They are wondering why the CEO of a failing tech startup is screaming at one of my senior executives," Harrison stated. Dominic froze. The anger instantly melted off his face like wax near a flame, replaced by utter, paralyzing confusion. He looked at Harrison, then slowly turned his head to look at me. "Executive," Dominic stammered, his bravado completely gone. "What are you talking about, Harrison?" "He is a secretary. Garrison told me he was a clerical worker. He files papers." "Garrison told you," Harrison repeated smoothly. He looked down at my brother, who was currently clutching his wife's ruined, wine-soaked purse to his chest like a shield. "Garrison seems to be horribly misinformed about a great many things regarding his own family. And clearly, Dominic, you do not properly vet the people holding your corporate life in their hands." Harrison turned to me, giving me a short, definitive nod. "Nathaniel, I think it is time for the final assessment." I smoothed the front of my midnight blue jacket. I reached into my inner pocket and pulled out a small, cream-colored rectangle of heavy cardstock. I held it out directly to Dominic. "Read it," I commanded. My voice carried across the silent room. I did not ask him. I ordered him. Dominic took the card. His hands were shaking so violently, he almost dropped it into the puddle of spilled wine. He squinted at the embossed gold lettering. The color drained from his face until he looked physically ill. "Nathaniel," Dominic read aloud, his voice cracking and barely audible. He cleared his throat and tried again, louder this time. "Senior Director, Strategic Acquisitions, Apex Holdings." He stopped. He blinked rapidly. He read it again, moving his lips as if trying to understand a complex foreign language. The reality of his situation was crashing down on him with the weight of a freight train. "Acquisitions," Dominic whispered, the life completely draining from his eyes. He looked at me, realizing he had just demanded the man controlling his fate fetch him a drink. "That is exactly right," I said, my voice projecting clearly for the entire VIP section to hear. "I am the person who has been heavily reviewing your Series B funding file for the last 3 weeks, Dominic. I am the person who flagged your marketing spend as completely reckless and grossly negligent. And I am the person who discovered the massive, fraudulent bot traffic on your servers at 4 o'clock yesterday afternoon." Garrison made a sound like a dying animal. It was a small, choked gasp that escaped his throat. He staggered back a step, bumping into the table behind him. "No," Garrison whispered, shaking his head side to side in absolute denial. That is not real. You make copies. Mom said you make copies. You are just an admin. You can't be a senior director." "Mom was wrong," I said, turning my absolute, unyielding focus onto my brother. "I manage a corporate real estate and tech portfolio worth $300 million. Garrison. I approve mergers. I deny funding. And right now, I am looking at a completely fraudulent company called Vantech Solutions." I turned my gaze back to Dominic. He looked like he was about to have a massive cardiac event right there on the marble floor. "Dominic," I said, my voice dropping to a lethal, quiet register that only the people in our immediate circle could hear. You just demanded that the single person holding your $5 million lifeline fetch you a double scotch. Dominic opened his mouth to speak, to beg, to explain his way out of it, but absolutely no sound came out. He was completely paralyzed by the reality of his own destruction. And you? I turned to Vivian, who was staring at me with wide, terrified eyes, completely forgetting about her ruined dress. You treated the lead investor of your husband's company like a coat check boy because you thought it made you look important. True wealth does not act like that, Vivian. I took one step closer to them, invading their space just as they had invaded mine for my entire life. Based on the sheer leadership incompetence I have witnessed tonight, I announced, raising my voice to make sure it echoed perfectly in the silent hall for everyone to hear, and the blatant, federal fraudulent data in your proposal regarding your fake user acquisition, I am officially marking Vantech Solutions as high risk. I paused, letting the words hang in the air. Actually, let us be entirely precise for the official corporate record. I corrected myself. I am marking it as toxic. Apex Holdings is completely withdrawing from all negotiations, effective immediately. The room remained dead silent. You could literally hear the ice melting in the champagne buckets nearby. 500 members of the financial elite were watching a live, unscripted corporate slaughter. Nathaniel, please, Garrison whispered, tears welling up in his eyes, his voice breaking. The house. We just refinanced the house. We put everything into this company. My salary is tied to this funding. We will lose everything. I know, Garrison, I said softly, feeling absolutely nothing for him. No pity, no regret, just a cold, analytical peace. But I do not mix family and business. And this, I gestured to the shattered glass and the spilled wine on the floor. This is just bad business. You built a house on a foundation of lies, and now the tide has come in. I turned back to Harrison, who was watching the scene with quiet satisfaction. I am completely done here, I told him, buttoning my jacket. I am going to go get a steak across town. The food here is a little too cheap for me. Understood, Harrison said, sitting back down and casually picking up his phone. I will see you in the glass boardroom on Monday morning. Bring the red pen, Nathaniel. We have a lot of paperwork to kill. I walked past them. I walked past Dominic, who was now trembling uncontrollably, realizing his unregulated loan sharks were going to come collecting their money very soon. I walked past Vivian, whose mascara was running down her face in thick black rivers. I walked past the table of junior associates, including Clara, whose jaws were practically on the floor. I walked out of the ballroom, keeping my head high. I did not look back. But as the heavy oak doors closed behind me, cutting off the light from the chandeliers, I heard the sound I had been waiting for my entire life. Absolute, terrified, permanent silence. Let's pause for a moment. Thank you for staying with me this far. You're truly amazing. Please help me by liking the video and commenting the number 1 below so I know you've been here with me until this point. This not only helps more people discover this story, but also lets me know that my experiences mean something to someone. Your support is the greatest motivation for me to keep sharing the rest of this journey. Now, let us move to the morning after the explosion, where the real legal nightmare began for my brother. I woke up at exactly 6 in the morning on Monday to a world that was absolutely screaming for my attention. My personal phone, which I had left charging on the kitchen island over the weekend, was vibrating so violently against the granite countertop that it sounded like a construction jackhammer. I did not rush to answer it. I took my time. I made a slow, deliberate pour-over coffee. I stood by the massive windows of my penthouse apartment, watching the sun rise over the Hudson River. The morning light was cold, gray, and completely unforgiving. It reflected exactly how I felt inside. Empty of all the old familial guilt, but fiercely final. When I finally picked up the phone, the lock screen was a solid, endless wall of panic notifications. 52 missed calls, 38 text messages. For frantic voicemails, I scrolled through the list, Mother appeared 20 times. Garrison appeared 15 times. There were calls from my father, and even a number I did not recognize, which was highly likely Dominic trying to bypass corporate channels to beg for his professional life. I opened the text messages first. I wanted to see the exact narrative they were trying to spin. Mother. Nathaniel. Answer your phone right now. Your brother is absolutely hysterical. He has not slept in 2 days. He says you attacked him and his boss at the gala? What is wrong with you? We raised you better than this. Call him and apologize immediately. Father, you are destroying this family out of pure jealousy. I always knew you had a mean streak. Call me immediately. You need to fix this mistake with your boss before Garrison loses his job. Garrison, Nathaniel, please man, talk to me. Dominic is talking about a massive corporate lawsuit. The other investors heard what you said at the gala and they are pulling out. Vivian won't stop crying and she is threatening to take the kids to her mother's house. We are losing everything. Please, you have to fix this report. Tell them you made a mistake. We are brothers. I stared at the messages. We are brothers. That card was only ever played when he needed me to take the fall or fix his massive mistakes. I deleted them. All of them. I did not listen to a single voicemail. I took a hot shower, put on a sharp, charcoal gray, double-breasted suit, and headed to the office. The air in the Apex Holdings building felt entirely different when I walked into the lobby. The security guards gave me a deeper, much more respectful nod. The receptionist at the front desk did not just smile. She watched me walk all the way to the private executive elevator. Word travels at the absolute speed of light in the financial sector, and the story of the secretary who publicly executed a CEO at a black tie event was already a certified corporate legend. I walked into my corner office and found Harrison already there. You're late, he said, checking his watch, though there was a distinct, proud smile on his face. I had a lot of family garbage to delete from my phone, I replied casually, setting my leather briefcase down on the desk. Harrison stood up and buttoned his jacket. The Vantech executive team is already in the building. Dominic, Garrison, and their external legal counsel. They look like they are preparing to attend a funeral. Good, I said, grabbing my laptop and a stack of printed server logs, because I am about to perform the corporate autopsy. We walked side by side down the long hallway toward Boardroom A. This specific room is designed strategically to intimidate people. It is entirely made of glass walls, brushed steel accents, and heavy acoustic silence. The main conference table is a 20-foot slab of solid black granite that reflects the nervous, sweating faces of anyone sitting at it. When I walked through the glass doors, the Vantech team was already seated on the far side. Dominic looked like he had physically aged 10 years over the weekend. His eyes were completely bloodshot, dark bags hung under them, and his expensive suit was terribly wrinkled. Garrison sat next to him, his face pale as a ghost, his hands shaking noticeably as he gripped an expensive fountain pen. He absolutely would not make eye contact with me. He just stared at the granite table. I opened my laptop and connected it to the massive 60-inch high-definition presentation screen on the wall. Let us begin, I said. My voice was entirely professional, cold, and completely devoid of any warmth or familial connection. We are here to review the final due diligence on the Vantech Solutions series, the acquisition proposal. Now look here, Nathaniel. Dominic started, leaning forward, his voice cracking with desperation and lack of sleep. It is director. I corrected him instantly, cutting him off without even looking up from my screen. And you will have your turn to speak when I allow it, Dominic. For now, let us look at the hard data. The data you certified as accurate. I pulled up a slide labeled Marketing ROI and User Engagement. I aimed a laser pointer at the screen and looked directly at my brother. Garrison, I said sharply. As Director of Marketing, you signed off on these exact figures. Is that correct? Garrison flinched violently as if I had struck him. He looked nervously at Dominic, then back at me. Yes, he whispered weakly. Speak up for the legal record, please, I demanded. Yes, Garrison said slightly louder. According to your official proposal, I continued, circling a massive number on the screen with the laser pointer, Vantech spent $500,000 on influencer marketing and luxury VIP events in the last quarter alone. You projected this would lead to a 30% increase in organic user growth. I clicked to the next slide, which showed a steep downward red line. In reality, your organic growth dropped by 2%. Your highly paid influencers were mostly bot accounts. You spent $500,000 of investor cash on a ghost campaign, including a $50,000 launch party in Vegas. Garrison tried to defend himself, stammering about long-term brand awareness and modern marketing strategies. But Dominic turned on him like a rabid dog. Dominic started screaming at Garrison about the wasted budget, throwing him entirely under the bus in front of us. I let them fight for a long moment, watching the loyalty completely dissolve. The marketing incompetence is just a symptom of the actual disease, I said, cutting them both off. The real issue is the federal fraud. I clicked to the heat map of Vantech's server activity. I exposed the Eastern European bot farms, showing the exact IP addresses they purchased the traffic from. Dominic went completely white. His external lawyer, a sharp man in a pinstripe suit who had not said a single word yet, suddenly sat up very straight. He looked at the screen, realized his client had lied to him too, and quietly began packing his documents back into his briefcase. You bought fake traffic to artificially inflate your numbers for this acquisition, I stated clearly, ensuring the legal team heard every word. Either you knew about it, which is intentional fraud, or you didn't know about it, which is gross managerial incompetence. Either way, the valuation of this company just dropped to absolutely zero. Nathaniel, please, Garrison practically sobbed, abandoning all professionalism and leaning over the granite table toward me. We were just trying to make it look successful so the deal would go through. We were going to fix the numbers and build the real user base once we had the Apex money. I swear it. You were going to use our money to pay off the massive lies you told to get it? I said coldly, looking at my brother with absolute disgust. That is not how Apex Holdings operates. We also know about your unregulated bridge loans, Dominic. You put this company in massive debt to dangerous people. The lawyer snapped his briefcase shut. He knew a sinking ship when he saw one. He stood up and excused himself from the room, leaving his clients completely defenseless. The recommendation from the acquisitions team is a formal, absolute rejection of the Series B funding proposal, I announced, closing my laptop with a loud snap. Garrison let out a gut-wrenching wail and buried his face in his shaking hands. Dominic just sat there, frozen, staring at the black granite table, watching his entire empire vanish into thin air, knowing exactly who was going to come collecting his debts. The meeting was officially adjourned. I gathered my things, stood up, and walked out of the room, leaving them to their total ruin. By Tuesday night, the professional corporate battle had officially ended, but the domestic war within my family had reached its absolute peak. I was sitting in my living room, reading a book, when my phone rang. I looked at the caller ID. It was Aunt Beatrice. In our family hierarchy, she is the supreme court of guilt trips. She is the keeper of traditions, the distributor of shame, and the loudest voice in the room. I answered it, putting it on speakerphone as I poured a glass of water. Nathaniel, she snapped, her voice like rough sandpaper on wood. No hello. No asking how I was doing. I have been on the phone with your mother for 3 consecutive hours. She is absolutely inconsolable. I know exactly what you did. I know you used your little position at that bank to publicly humiliate your brother. Do you have any idea what this is doing to the family? His wife left him this morning. I performed a professional corporate audit, Beatrice, I said calmly. Garrison's company was committing federal fraud. They lied to investors. They bought fake users. Should I have committed a crime to cover for his incompetence? Fraud is just a word people like you use to sound important, she shouted, completely ignoring logic. This is about family loyalty. This is about blood. If you do not fix this right now, if you do not go to your boss and tell him you made a mistake, you are dead to this family. We are having a meeting tomorrow to remove your name from the family trust. You will not get a single dime of your grandfather's inheritance. The land, the stocks, nothing. And you are permanently banned from the Thanksgiving dinner." I laughed. It was a genuine, sharp, incredibly freeing sound. "Keep the inheritance, Beatrice," I told her, leaning back on my sofa. "I make more in a single financial quarter than that dusty piece of land is worth. Give it all to Garrison. He is going to need it to pay his massive legal fees and his alimony. And as for Thanksgiving, I will greatly enjoy the silence. I am tired of eating by the kitchen door anyway." I hung up the phone and immediately blocked her number, along with my parents and my brothers. I felt a profound, overwhelming sense of absolute freedom wash over me. The heavy chains of obligation were gone. Wednesday morning, I walked back into the boardroom with Harrison and the two senior partners from the legal and risk departments. The final recommendation on the Vantech file was due. I had spent the entire night thinking as a cold strategist, not as a victimized brother. "The play is not a total rejection," I told the board, projecting my final slides. "That would be a waste of a genuinely good tech asset. Vantech's underlying compression algorithm is actually brilliant. It is 3 years ahead of the market. The technology itself is a massive asset. The current management, however, is a toxic liability." I proposed a hostile asset purchase. We would bypass the company completely and buy the intellectual property and the physical assets of Vantech for $3 million, significantly less than their original $5 million ask, and just enough for Dominic to pay off his dangerous loans and walk away with nothing but his life. But as a strict, non-negotiable condition of the sale, the entire executive board and the marketing department were to be dissolved immediately. No severance packages, no retention bonuses, no golden parachutes. You are effectively firing the CEO. And your own brother, Harrison noted, raising an eyebrow, impressed by the sheer brutality of the move. "I am removing the obstacles to growth," I corrected him smoothly. "They committed fraud. They are legally and professionally unfit to manage an Apex-backed entity. The junior engineers who actually built the tech get to keep their jobs. The management gets exactly what they earned." The board unanimously agreed. It was a brilliant financial move. The paperwork was drawn up that afternoon. 6 months later, I was sitting in my new, even larger corner office. I had officially been promoted to Vice President of Strategic Operations. My name was etched deep into the thick frosted glass door. I was completely no contact with my mother, my father, and Garrison. They had made their ultimate choice long ago. They preferred the comfortable, fictional myth of the golden child over the reality of the successful, hard-working younger brother. It hurt initially, but it was a very clean pain, like a necessary surgical incision that was finally healing properly without infection. I heard through the financial industry grapevine that the immense stress of the bankruptcy and the terrifying revelation of the massive secret debts had been way too much for Garrison's superficial marriage. Vivian filed for a brutal, highly contested divorce. They were currently fighting a nasty, expensive custody battle over their leased cars and heavily mortgaged house, which was now in foreclosure. Garrison was working a low-level commission sales job, completely stripped of his arrogant marketing title and his Rolex. I realized then, looking out over the city skyline, that I did not actually miss my family. I missed the fictional version of them I had desperately invented in my head, the version that would eventually be proud of me, the version that would return my stolen college fund, the version that would love me equally. Once I finally stopped waiting for that fake version of my family to magically appear, I was finally free to live my own beautiful life. Your value as a human being is absolutely never determined by the people who cannot afford to see it. 4 years, I let my family define me as a glorified secretary. I let them use me as a disposable background character in their ridiculous, chaotic drama. But the ultimate truth is, I was always the one holding the pen. I was the one taking the notes, learning the complex systems, and building the immense power they stupidly assumed I didn't possess. So, here is my final question to you. I saved the core technology of the company, but I effectively fired my own brother and pushed his fraudulent life into total chaos. My family calls me a heartless monster, and I have lost my so-called inheritance. But looking at the peace in my life and the rock-solid integrity of my massive career, am I wrong? Should I have let the corporate fraud slide just because we share DNA? Or was I absolutely right to finally choose my own balance sheet over his toxic ego? Have you ever faced something similar with your own toxic family? Share your story in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss the next journey.